By authoring virtual meetings with a human touch, we're helping clients build relationships and build community, but also fight Zoom fatigue. Hey, hey,
Morning, Norman. How are you?
good morning. How are you?
Good.
So excited that you could jump on. This is pretty cool.
Tell me what's going to happen on this call.
So, I am helping a lot of clients transition from face to face professional development
Right.
and move into virtual pieces. So, what we are creating are really pedagogical tools, the same ones we use in person, and we're folding them into the virtual space.
Sounds good.
The first thing I'm going to do is share my screen. Do you see the start of our piece where it says Zoom taxonomy?
Yeah, I do.
So, are you familiar with the Zoom chat box?
I am.
Okay. So, using it as not only a space just to chat, but a space to actually save session data and a whiteboard per se for our thinking during sessions.
Got the chat box itself as a whiteboard.
Yep, the chat box itself is the whiteboard, exactly.
Okay. Let me ask you a quick question.
Shoot.
Is it okay to ask questions or do you want
Please,
to?
no, please, please.
Okay, so it's going to be key to attend to the fact that even though the chat is a running documentation of the sidebar conversations that are going on in conjunction with the primary text, whatever's happening inside the Zoom itself, it's going to be important to attend to the fact that there can also be a distraction from what's going on in the Zoom room itself. And so just being aware that, I'm monitoring the chat as it's emerging to see that there's some synchronicity between what they're saying to each other in connection with what's going on at the same time in the Zoom, in the Zoom meeting itself.
Exactly. So that potential distraction is actually then converted into an instructional opportunity.
Okay.
First, of course, we always have our direction. So providing people with the direction is the best, fastest way I have found to share strategies,
Right.
And keep the integrity or keep the fidelity of the strategy.
Okay.
Right in the Zoom chat box, respond, talk, and collaborate. Add words, ideas, and people you associate with identity.
Okay, let me get this together here. Okay. Oh, let me submit it. This would be in conversation now, not going back to the chat box.
Right. So now the facilitator is using the chat box to drive the meeting conversation. So say, hey, Dr. Mahiri, this is really interesting. Can you tell us about political and cultural reasons?
So once I got out of the Army, I felt a need to atone because rather than being able to go to college, I was drafted during the Vietnam era. And once I came back from 18 months in Vietnam, I immediately zoomed through college, but also worked a lot with a number of activist-oriented organizations, anti-apartheid, African liberation organizations, independent school movement organizations, and that kind of thing. In our independent school movement organization, we decided to purchase an 80-acre farm in Michigan that would allow us to have experiences for our kids on the land. So it's just about a 2-hour drive from Chicago, which is where I was residing at the time. The leader of our organization, Don L. Lee, the famous poet of the Black Arts Movement, and I was the associate director, drove up and signed a contract for the land. And the German banker made an interesting observation. My name was Cleve Washington. His name was Don L. Lee. And the banker said, as we signed, oh, 2 of our famous generals, Lee and Washington. And so as we drove back, we had to reflect on the ways our names had linked us to a history that in many ways had been oppressive to us. And we decided in our organization to create a name changing opportunity by developing a name change committee that would accept requests for name change, evaluate people's personality, offer them a couple suggestions for names that they felt were appropriate to their personality. Mine, Jabari, ended up being strong. It means strong.
Continue to build community with a follow-up question. Use a built-in question or go with the flow. Discuss actions that cultivate asset-based identity.
An act of atonement on the one hand and an act of affirmation on the other. The affirmation is just affirming, African culture from which, I came. But at the same time, it's never clean because you can't just change history immediately by an act of resistance because there are other implications and consequences. So struggles that my parents had with me changing my name and moving away from the family name of Washington, which had its own history. There's a book out on our family that traces a plantation in Tennessee that was the place that, ironically, after the slave period had ended, they had taken a lot of photographs of all of the people who were working on that plantation, and they were all pretty much relatives of mine with the last name Washington. So this cousin did that book, but my parents were like saying, this name has history in and of itself. If you want to change your name, maybe just change your first name. Don't change both your first and your last name. And of course, my argument back was like, why then don't we have a problem with women, changing their name through marriage and losing their last name and getting into another line of ancestry? So there was no easy resolution to that, but over time they accepted it. And of course, what's interesting is that in terms of my 4 kids and my 4 grandkids, there are now 8 other people on the planet who were born with the last name Mahiri and see no other history in the lineage of their name beyond being a person who's named Mahiri.
That's really powerful. What part of Tennessee?
It's just outside of Memphis, Tennessee.
Okay.
It's a plantation that still exists. They made it almost like a little museum. It's called the Wessington Plantation, and the title of the book is The Washingtons of Wessington.
This completes the Zoom taxonomy. Now let's move into anticipate identity.